Thank you very much, Rob. Yes, I'm Chris Yeates. I'm one of the managers in the Department of the Environment, Tourism, Science and Innovation in the Science Division there. And I'm in the Quantum and Advanced Technologies team. So our role in Queensland Government is to support the policy development around quantum, advanced technologies, deep tech, and of course, including semiconductors in that as well. So I'm very lucky today that I get to be the moderator of this panel with an excellent selection of speakers here. So thank you all very much for being involved today. So as you all will be aware, semiconductors are at the heart of modern devices, all of our modern devices. And they are key to making the right connections, which we're all doing today with our excellent lineup of speakers. And also they are all fully charged and ready with insights and ideas. So my puns on semiconductors didn't really land like I thought, but anyhow, moving on. Okay, so as I introduce the panel members that we have today, I will also be posing a challenge to them in 1 to 2 words to tell me what they think is the impact of the semiconductor sector in Queensland and in Australia. So I'll start off with my order here. I'll start off with Cathy Foley, and I think that this is one person where truly you do need in a crowd like this no introduction for Cathy. Dr. Cathy Foley, Order of Australia, served as Australia's Chief Scientist until December 2024, following a distinguished career at CSIRO, including also as Chief Scientist for that organisation. Cathy is a world-renowned physicist. She led pioneering research in superconductors and sensors, culminating in the LAND-TEM mineral exploration system. As Chief Scientist, she advanced the National Quantum and Research Strategy and the National Science and Research Priorities for the country. Her leadership and advocacy for women in STEM earned her many accolades and many fans, myself included. Great work, Cathy. Really, really excited to be up here. She was recently announced as the President-elect of the Australian Academy of Technological Sciences and Engineerings. She is an advocate for research translation, quantum technologies, open access to research literature, and scientific excellence. So, Cathy, your 1 to 2 words on the impact of semiconductors.
Oh, it's really hard to have 1 or 2 words. Well, I think the first one is ubiquitous, and the second one is we couldn't live without it, strung together as one word.
Okay. Say it very quickly. Yes, thank you.
Just by the way, I am on CSIRO board, but I'm not really CSIRO, so just so I'm not.
Okay, now next on my list I have Dr. Glen Harris. So this is an amazing bio for Glen. So Glen, thank you very much for supporting the event. We've got you in a few panels here today. Dr. Glen Harris is a physicist driven by curiosity about how fundamental quantum experiments can inspire new kinds of technology. He completed his PhD at the University of Queensland in 2015, working on precision measurement and quantum optomechanics and superfluid helium using nanofabricated devices. Yeah, pretty impressive. After several years at Yale University, and I have attempting, but apparently I heard earlier you did do it, not just attempting, you actually achieved levitating superfluid droplets. And then he returned to UQ in 2018 to explore unconventional computing in collaboration with Lockheed Martin, focusing on radiation-hardened computation using nanomechanical systems. This work led to him to co-found Cortisonic, a startup developing reservoir computing with nanomechanical resonators. So Glen, then, your 1 to 2 words on the impact of semiconductors.
So we can hyphenate words, right?
All right.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think I can just stick with 2 actually, and it's economic resilience. We need to, expand our portfolio, particularly in Queensland, to be able to, broaden our income stream in Queensland. Those are the 2 words.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Glen. Remember that. So Erik, we now have sitting next to me, Associate Professor Erik Streed. Erik is an experimental quantum physicist by training and presently the director of Griffith University's Queensland Quantum and Advanced Technologies Research Institute. Watry. That's right, the new acronym. Originally from Minneapolis, Minnesota, he graduated from Caltech and MIT before immigrating to Australia in 2006. Erik is best known for his work imaging the shadow of a single atom, which was a result of his pioneering work using microfabrication to miniaturize the segmented lens technology from lighthouses to solve the atom-photon interconnect problem in quantum computers. A multidisciplinary researcher, he's also a member of the Institute of Biomedicine and Glycomics. So Erik, your 1 to 2 words.
I'd say sovereign leverage. So semiconductors is a global activity. You say have things fabricated in Taiwan using lithography systems made in the Netherlands, using chemicals made in Korea and Japan, with optics made in Germany. And we need to be at the table with not the whole system, but with particular niches where we have got leverage and we can shine as the global leader.
Okay. Thanks, Erik. It was a long 1 to 2 words, but you're an academic. We understand. No, that's fine. And so our final panel member today, Norbert Kraus, is here. And thank you, Norbert, for also joining us on the panel today. So Norbert has a physics degree from the Technical University of Munich, and he worked at the Semiconductor Lab of Max Planck Institute for Extraterrestrial Physics on X-ray sensing CCD for the Space Telescope XM Newton. Since 2007, Norbert has been working at Solana in Brisbane. So that's a company that we have here in Brisbane. Great to have them on board today. Solana is developing new technology in semiconductors using UVC, LED, power converter, as well as RF switches and isolation interface devices. So Norbert, your 1 to 2 words.
Yeah, I really like the sovereign aspect of it, but I describe the industry as hidden gems. I'm always surprised what is out there, but I never knew it existed.
Great, thank you. Hidden gems. That's an excellent one. Okay, so I'll start off with then the first question today that I'll go to all of the panelists. So I'll just maybe take it from left to right. So for you all today, how can industry, government and academia work together more effectively to build a thriving semiconductor ecosystem in Queensland? So Erik.
I can just be loud. I think it's about coordination. I think it's about bringing people together and stirring the pot, and not necessarily picking winners, but creating good environments for things to prosper. So providing support like Quantum Australia is doing in helping start companies.
How long? We got a couple of minutes, is it? For this one? Okay. So there's a really huge gap between R&D in an academic environment and industry, and the role of government I see is bridging that gap through funding support. And I think it's critical to have funding support which is consistent year on year, because these are long time constants. These projects, they can't just happen on a 1 or a 2 year timescale, right? They're a multi-year timescale, and so I think that is the role of government in connecting the R&D researchers with industry and the pipeline along it that way. Cathy?
I think what's needed is a really clear emphasis on developing the ecosystem. So if you look back over history, we've had track records where we've, in the country, not necessarily in Queensland, but solar panels were developed at University of New South Wales, commercialised in China. But there was a good reason for that. In the 80s, most things were done by manual labour. Automation wasn't really the thing. Australia had high salaries. China had lower salaries. So the postdocs who developed that work commercialised it in China. And thank goodness it's saving the world with climate change. But that could have been an industry in Australia had we taken that step. The next thing was, if you think was Wi-Fi, which was developed at CSIRO at Marsfield. And then the first Wi-Fi chip was developed at Macquarie University. That's often a hidden fact, by the way, and by Mark Perella. And a startup company happened, Radiata, which Dave Skillen set up with some of the people from CSIRO as well. but they ended up selling out to Cisco Systems because there might have been a company, but a company is not an industry, and they didn't have that ecosystem to support it. So what we're seeing at the moment is with semiconductors, they've been, Solana's been around for a long time. I've worked really closely with them when you were down at Homebush Bay, and it's that's in Sydney, near where the Olympic Park is down there. It's something where, again, we've got a few companies and we've got growing capability, not just in the hardware, but also in design, in packaging, potentially in packaging. I know there's plans to grow that here, as well as looking at the end of compound semiconductors and where that all fits into the ambition to have the realisation of deep tech industries, which we need desperately to replace the billions of dollars that we're going to lose as we transition away from fossil fuels. So building that ecosystem is going to be really critical, but it's got to be something which just doesn't happen. In the past, we've just hoped that, you hear about the invisible hand of the market will make magic happen. And we know in Australia that does not happen. It might in other countries, but not here. So getting government, university sector, publicly funded agencies, I'd add to your list, as well as industry coming together is critical if we're going to realise the opportunity.
Great, thanks, Cathy. And Norbert?
Yeah, I agree. The infrastructure is really critical to have a certain amount of people doing the same thing. And looking back in the 90s in Germany, there was a lot of semiconductor startups, companies that made semiconductor equipment. There was a trade show. There was with like tens of thousands of people visiting on a single day, and it was. I'm not even sure if that was enough critical infrastructure. If you look at the semiconductor industry in Germany now, it's still there, but it's clearly also moved a lot into Asia. So I think that the chance for a semiconductor in Australia is the compound semiconductors, the small things, the new things. And companies often face the problem that they can't get their ideas put into practice without huge investments. Solana is fortunately in a position to do a lot of that. But we also send a lot of things to Asia for processing that we can't do here. We lost the capability. We had a CMOS fab in Sydney that gave way to a train station. That's another story, yes. But the one aspect is the equipment can be shared if it is run by a professional commercial entity, maybe with a lot of government support. It is the models that we're having right now, I think, are not working really well for industry. They work for universities. They can get things done at universities. But if we want to get things made on a time scale or outsourced, it can be a single process step. It doesn't work for us with the present system. We would love to see a commercial foundry open to everyone.
Okay, thanks, Norbert. I'll take the question then back to Erik now and work through with some individual questions. So Erik, what makes Queensland uniquely positioned to play a leading role in the global semiconductor industry, and how can we capitalise on these strengths?
I think it's a question of trying to get us into the Goldilocks zone where we're big enough that we've got critical mass and we can do some of the compound semiconductor things in particular that Norbert mentioned. We've got some great advantages there with Solana and with some of our silicon carbide technology. But at the same time, if we're able to stay small enough that we're able to be nimble and have a very active community, we can have a very fast response time and be able to identify opportunities and execute on them quickly. So it's a question of getting to that right size, that Goldilocks zone, and then being able to leverage that against our strengths.
Great, thanks, Erik. The next question then I'll pose to Glen and to Norbert. coming from a startup and then the industry player. What challenges do you foresee in scaling semiconductor manufacturing in Queensland, and how can we overcome them?
So there are a lot of challenges in that. The first is cost. Like it's an expensive industry to step into, and somewhat related to that is picking the right sort of type of manufacturing that you want to focus on. Like obviously we're not going to be making 10, 15 nanometer chips to go in mobile phones. We just don't have that capacity, and that's too much money and too much investment. So picking niche markets that there is local expertise and local talent and a disposition towards commercialization, and focusing on those and funding them well, right? If you have a clean room that's missing a key piece of infrastructure, no one uses it, right? And so picking a niche sort of market that we have an edge on, and then funding it well, funding it continuously over longer periods of time, and then providing an intermediate step between the R&D sorts of fabrications that we can do at universities, which are very fast, and this larger scale fabrication at larger foundries. So on the order of, if we'd like to do hundreds of chips a week or a month, that's hard to do here. Norbert?
Yeah, I think I agree. I mean, when you have a product that works and the funding is there, the company will grow and scale by itself. But I think scaling is also maybe in terms of having other companies with different products in an environment where you get staff maybe from exchange between companies and industry and the universities to you get many new ideas that are popping out of such an environment. I think that's what we need to achieve. And if you want to have a critical scaling here in Queensland, we need many more startups that try and get funded, and some of them will grow.
Okay, thanks. So Cathy, not to leave you out in the middle there. So then what role does fundamental research play in building a sustainable semiconductor ecosystem? And how can we ensure it translates into real-world applications?
Well, you always need fundamental research in any industry because you've got to keep looking to the future. And I'll give a really good example in the semiconductor area that might be of relevance here. We're looking at the energy transition, which will be having, instead of sort of a handful of major power stations, which we've had in the past, to having millions of power sources that will be providing our energy grid. But with that comes the need for a whole lot of power electronics, which is based on nitride semiconductors or silicon carbide, and the ability to then meet with the quantum stuff that helps to optimize that. And Australia is really well placed to take that as a niche area to develop and design the power electronics, make them here, package them here, and be known internationally as the place you go to get your power electronics. So that's a real opportunity. There's not really that many places in the world, and people are looking to Australia as being, and I tend to be more Australia rather than state-centric, but the thing is that we do have capability here which is recognised. We did some of the early work in some of the nitride work. I mean, my PhD was in indium nitride when it was an esoteric material in the early 80s, and made indium nitride on silicon photodiode, which was probably one of the first ones ever built. I never wrote up that chapter of my PhD thesis, So always write up your work. But anyway, that aside, it's that fundamental work was picked up by Japan and led to light emitting diodes. So you need to be fueling things at one end, but you also need to be focusing on the areas. So one of our challenges for Australia is that we have a bit of a culture that every child wins a balloon, and therefore we then, mixing my metaphors, spread our money like Vegemite across the toast of Australia. And so we need to get to a point where we think about dipping strawberries into the chocolate, so we have a thing which we're focusing on and getting agreement on that. It still needs fundamental work. And I think the quantum experience has shown that Australia's done that well. So if you look at, 20 years ago when, no, it's probably only 15 years ago when we were looking at the physics decadal plan, which was being developed for Australia, we had a bit of physics in every discipline. Since that time, we've really focused down on a few areas. And I see quantum, semiconductors, and photonics as being a trifecta that come together as part of that ecosystem to deliver. And when you look at where it can be used in a whole lot of different areas, then we want to make sure we are funding the fundamental research in those areas. We don't want to suddenly go off and do research into Chinese hair artistry, because as much as that might be really interesting for an individual, money is, and we need to have a little bit of that, sort of next generation stuff, but we need to be funding the fundamental research in the areas where we want to focus on, where there's potential industry, because otherwise we tend to sort of say, we've done that, let's move on to the next thing, when actually you need to keep on fueling that fire.
Okay, so probably sticking with the same theme then about, looking at where the areas are that we should be working towards, and maybe using your analogy as well of the strawberry dipped in the chocolate. So for whatever your strawberry and chocolate or whatever else it is for you, for all of you then, if you could implement one game-changing initiative, so that's our strawberry and the chocolate, to accelerate Queensland's semiconductor industry, what would it be? Go ahead, Cathy.
You really need to have a flexi fab line, and someone needs to invest in it. I've been talking about this. We were trying to get one set up with Solana at Linfield in Sydney, and then you've got got a train station dumped on top of your CMOS centre, so that didn't work and that died. But this is what we hear over and over again, is that these are expensive businesses to start up. But to get your process right beyond the ANFF, which is really important, but the next step, and this is the gap for Australia, is having enough, the size of equipment where you can go in and book and line up the stuff so that you can do your process to be able to make your 1,000 devices or whatever it is to enter the market, so that then you can attract the investment to go to the next stage and buy your own kit. And that is missing in Australia, and it's unless we fund that, we are just fooling ourselves. So there we go. That's my one.
Yes, I can absolutely echo that. We need an intermediate foundry, something that can produce hundreds to maybe thousands of chipsets, slightly longer time constant, but the step from the academic R&D environment up to full-scale foundry. And it needs to be staffed by people that know what they're doing. It needs to have a continued funding revenue, so that we can rely on it going forward. And startups can rely on it, and venture capital can rely on it being there. And then having accessibility by the startup community into those foundries.
So you pay for use, but
Yeah.
you have the equipment there.
I'd go a little bit deeper with regard to that in helping build up the educational infrastructures in terms of, from TAFE, from primary school, that people have got the capabilities to staff those sorts of facilities. And that ranges from people with, the semiconductor background to be designing these new devices, from the tradespeople that are installing the electrical work and the gas piping, to enable these facilities to be built not just as this intermediate stage, but when companies want to deploy out, that you've got 4 or 5 firms across Australia that are well practiced and hopefully internationally leading in being able to implement those, preferably in compound semiconductors like silicon carbide and GaN, but even more basically to fundamental math education to be able to enable that, so that we're not necessarily picking winners in, silicon carbide is going to be the thing, but that whether that's supporting the semiconductor industry, whether that's supporting defense or the biotech industry, those same core high-tech needs are fairly universal when you get down to the brass tacks of moving electrons around, moving piping and plumbing around, being able to pour a concrete slab that makes sure whether it's the semiconductor equipment or the biotech equipment is stable and is going to reflect that capital investment correctly.
Yes, and I go along with Cathy and Glen. Definitely, I mean, you're definitely correct there as well. But I think we need a facility where things can get done without having to invest $50 or $100 million into equipment. And these facilities exist overseas, and you can tap into them. It's just often very, very, very hard to do something new in those facilities. The part of Solana in the US tried that very successfully. You probably have a chip of that adventure in your phone. And it took a few years to get a Taiwan company to integrate that added process step into the CMOS fabrication. So I'm not talking that we should have CMOS fabrication, but a flexible entity that allows us to do new things quickly and locally would be very, very, very important, I think.
Great, thank you. I'm aware, we're getting to the last 10 minutes or so before you all get a well-deserved break. Before I open for questions from the floor, I'll just put one more question to the panel, and feel free, whoever wants to jump in, so you can all think about if you have a question for the panel. What skills and expertise are most critical for Queensland to develop a competitive semiconductor workforce? Maybe I should say for Australia, but clearly all in Queensland.
Look, I think one of the things is if you look at the technical side, I think we talked about VET before, we don't have enough training of people who are going to be the technicians. Well, quite often at the moment, most of them are, for example, if you look at the ANFF, a lot of the process engineers have got undergraduate degrees, and that's terrific, but probably when you start getting to the point where you're running things which are more factory-like things, you probably need to work out how to do that. Cryogenics is a real weakness, so it's very hard to find people with cryogenics capabilities, although we heard yesterday that if you make beer, you can potentially be in the right area because of some of the cooling requirements they have. Design, I think, circuit design, printed circuit design, and I know that S3B, which is a New South Wales government initiative, they're really keen to go national and making sure that we're coordinated in that way, and so they're developing a relationship with Cadence so that we've got that sort of capability for design. Just even understanding packaging and what that means. And for those of you who aren't used to it, it's not about busy with cardboard packaging. It's putting the hardware and the stuff and the testing that goes with electronics. What have I missed? You always need statistics. You need people who are good at Sigma, whatever it is, for quality control. You can see it's a while since I've done this sort of thing, but you can go on. Anything that is required for quality control, people who know marketing, people who know how to actually engage in the global markets. It's not just people with PhDs in physics from University of Queensland or QUT.
I'm just here to flog math education. Well, physics too, but math I think is really where one of the leverage points is, and one of the areas where we could very much leverage up versus where we are now, particularly in Queensland.
Design of experiments, we don't have enough of that. Machine learning, doesn't matter where you actually, what study, there is a need for that capability there. And at the moment, Queensland actually turned things around in getting kids to do more maths and science in the last years of high school, but it's coming from a really low base. New South Wales is just at that turning point. Western Australia is still tanking. I don't know about the other states because their data isn't so easily accessible. But we need to get young people to realise there are jobs in science. At the moment, most teachers and parents think there aren't any jobs, and so they encourage their kids to do careers in areas where AI is already beginning to take those jobs away.
Yes, I think engineering often is one of the skills that is missing, specifically towards microengineering, and there are not too many jobs in Australia. That's why no one's going into that direction. But I think not everyone who's doing physics or maths, or maybe maths different, but chemistry does need a PhD. There's this mid-tier level is very important. I don't have a PhD. it's I think it's quite important to have a lot of doers as well that like to go and do the technology.
Okay, so in our last few minutes then, I'd just like to open it up to the floor. If anyone has a question that they would like to pose to the panel.
Thank you very much, everyone, for a really interesting talk. I'm really interested to know, when you talked about core facilities and they're not available in the semiconductor world, and they are in other worlds. So, for example, biosciences, we can go to TRI and use their equipment and any research. What do you think is the holdup with getting that facility for the semiconductor world? What would need to be done so researchers, academics, startup companies could access that equipment?
So I'm not sure you've got exactly the same situation. So in the biotech, there is still some gaps, like in synthetic biology. There's a real problem that we need to have a huge vat to be able to scale things up, and that's missing. It's the same with semiconductors, where it's beyond. ANFF has amazing capability across the country. I think it's one of the jewels in the crown of the NCRIS program, but it's also the envy of the world, because most other countries don't club together with their researchers to have top-of-the-line equipment, and it's magnificently run and it's got a fantastic track record. What's needed, though, is something which is beyond that. It's that intermediate scale, which is not quite a TMSC or a Global Foundries thing, but it's got automation, it's got, I don't know, whatever size, wafer, so that you've got wire bonding, you've got testing facilities, you've got you can do multi-layer lithography and different materials. The thing is, with a lot of thin film work, you can't just swap in and out materials because it contaminates, and that means you have to have hardware that's material specific, which adds to it. And then I guess the other one is you're getting to the scale so that you may not do the volume. So if you look at the CMOS foundries, you see corridors of what looks like exactly the same equipment because they're churning out lots of things. Well, you probably just need one of those rather than a whole line of them. Whatever it is that you might be doing for automated, layered structures that make up your device. And so it's a bit of a different thing, and it is expensive. We're talking about probably an investment of between $300 to $500 million. And it's something which it has been recognised as needed, but it's just one of those ones where we haven't got it quite over the line.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Thanks for a very interesting panel. Apologies for this very trendy question, but you mentioned AI a second ago, and so I was wondering if the panel has a perspective on how the rapid adaptation or adoption of AI may change the development of the semiconductor industry in Australia, either for the good or bad. Thanks.
I'm going to predict that it's going to be lumpy. There's going to be some tasks that AI happens to be very, very good at, and other tasks where it's going to be catastrophically unimpressive. I doubt that it's going to be terribly creative at developing new circuit concepts, but I think in terms of things like optimization, if it can look at and integrate what people have previously done for optimization, it's probably going to be quite good at that. I mean, AI right now is sort of like a parrot. It's very good at repeating back things that it's seen. Its ability to create new things is a little bit more interesting if you've ever seen, the pictures with 4 or 6 fingers on people's hands.
Yeah, similar to that, I think it'll probably be useful in the test and evaluation lifecycle, just churning through huge amounts of data and picking out correlations. On the fabrication side of it, we still need reactive ion etchers and e-beam lithography machines, and so all of that's going to stay more or less identical, I think. It's just the processing of the data on the back end.
Yeah, I wonder how to apply it sometimes, because we often have very complex processes and we would like to understand something and we don't because we just can't. It's too much data. It's too much depth in parameters and things that we measure, and the outcomes are very complex. And sometimes we would, I wonder if there's a really good application for AI to put all the data in and see what it comes up with, you know. I'm not informed enough to say if that's possible or not, but I'd love to see that as an application for us.
I think it's going to be useful for particularly processing, like, you know, you've got to make zillions of devices and you've got a whole lot of data and different parameters. It's very hard to actually optimize. I mean, so being able to, in fact, probably quantum computing optimization will be useful too, is that trying to, when you're developing a process, you've got different variables, you've got, you know, materials variations, all that sort of stuff. Being able to handle volumes of database data so that you can help you get to your happy spot for where your process optimization is, I can see that useful. But also it's going to increase the amount of energy we need, and so therefore it'll need more, lead to the need for more power electronics. So therefore it'll increase the demand side too.
Okay. Oh, we have another question up there.
Thank you. Sorry for capitalising questions from this bench. Earlier today, Erik mentioned how he felt that Queensland really punches above its weight globally. And I think Lachlan from an earlier panel would also probably agree that, you know, we certainly do. I'm really, really impressed to finally see you in the flesh, Cathy. Like Christine, I think you've done some wonderful things over the years. And so my question starts with you, but I think can broaden out. Given that so much of our focus is on the money and the concerns about governments continuing to always provide us with a revenue stream that can support our work, from your experience, Cathy, what would you say would be the most productive ways in which companies and perhaps public services even can increase our annual research and development budgets? What advice would you have?
So the first thing is being efficient, effective and impactful, so that we make sure that we're not wasting anything, that we're not looking like we're entitled, and that we realise we're doing stuff for goodness. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but it actually cuts through. And as soon as it looks like you've in it because you're going to get some sort of personal brownie points, it's talk to the hand, unfortunately, because even though that's probably what motivates is, you know, businesses want to make money and be successful or have profits, as does but the rest of the country needs that too. As I mentioned before, we've got to replace about $300 billion worth of exports by 2050 if we're going to be moving away from fossil fuels. So I see the investment we've put into science turning into industry opportunities is really important. And working with government to see that has been, you know, sort of a bit of a mantra for me. I got high expectations on the current program that's been started in the middle of last year on the strategic examination of research and development. We have the lowest in the OECD in industry expenditure in research and development for a range of reasons. It's mostly because we're 99% SMEs and 70% of them has less than 20 people. So we just don't have the sort of structural support of that, which means that we have to be inventive. And, you know, Australia is unique in many ways. You know, we've got the landmass of the USA, the population of Shanghai. We've got well-educated people. We've got clusters of populations. So, and we're well-educated. We've got you know, sort of a liberal democracy that everyone looks to as being amazing. Social cohesion that's wonderful. We've got amazing weather most of the time, and we have a community that I think we underestimate ourselves as a population. When I did the national conversation on behalf of the government looking at the science and research priorities, it was extraordinary to see the cohesiveness of intent. The values, even though there's a band in them, is really strong. And so what I found worked really well is having evidence-based, saying this is the evidence, this is the information, this is what I heard, this is where Australia wants to be. And not pull out my opinions, pull out my advocacy, and just say this is the evidence. Government, we elect you to make the decisions. And having a daughter-in-law who's your new senator for Queensland, Corinne Mulholland, she's the one with the waving baby, and that's my grandson in the Senate when she gave her maiden speech. You can look it up, that's little Augie, turned 1 on the weekend, very exciting. But seeing how hard she is working, and a whole lot of other politicians who, it is a shit life, that's a technical term, to be a politician who's not in ACT, because it is so disruptive to be able to do that. So majority of our politicians really want to do the right thing. But when you get a whole lot of different bits of information, and it's hard to know, the facts from the fiction, if they know they have trusted information that is evidence-based for goodness, they really listen and act on it. And I think too often we come across as saying we've got all the answers when we actually don't have all the answers. We don't know the complexities of all the levers government have to pull. And so when we go with a whole swag of recommendations saying we must do this, this and this, we don't actually understand how that fits in with the other things. But when we say the evidence is that Australia is really well placed, if we were to have a flexi-fab line, it would lead to productivity or prosperity or new businesses and overcome that hump. Over to you guys, how you might think about that. That's a really different way of presenting the information. And that's what I found cut through when I was in that role. From bitter experience, I might add. Karen Andrews, who was a fabulous member from Queensland, who was my first minister, she really taught me about how to present that stuff, and I'm forever grateful for her of showing me how to play that game, or it's not really a game, it's actually presenting ourselves in a way that is relevant to our elected officials. Remembering that our elected officials are just like my daughter-in-law, just like you and me, but they've put their hand up because they really believe in the country. And I think if you stand in their shoes and see things in a different way, noting that they're followed up by amazing public service, both in state and territory, that we can cut through when we do that. And having that clear vision that is about doing the right thing for the broader community, noting that we have an amazing country that has a high level of social cohesion, that I think we will get there. And I'm just seeing, the fact that Queensland has invested in PsyQuantum, they've got a packaging facility on the way. You keep investing. You even invest in quantum for sport. Who would have thought they would have done that after us pitching that 2 months after our first Quantum Meets Sport workshop? That is incredible, and it's something we should be proud of. But too often we cut ourselves off at the knees because we love a tall poppy and chop it down. So I've got to stop that. Anyway, enough of a rave.
Okay, so I think we're definitely at time. Thank you very much. No, it's great, Cathy. Thank you very much to all of the panel. And I guess I hand over to you, Rob.
Thank you very much. Yes, please, big round of applause for the panel and Christine, Erik, Glen, Cathy and Norbert.